Mark Zuckerberg is all over social media defending open source AI. And no, I'm not just talking about his platforms. But what is open source? Imagine if Coca-Cola decided to share its secret formula. Yes, that's open source. You'll be surprised by how many tech giants embrace open source software. Will AI players get into it? We'll discuss the nitty-gritty of AI in part 2 of this episode. But first, when a new piece of code is created, companies need to decide if they want to open source it. But why? As a finance strategist, the concept of companies giving away software did not make sense at all to me up to a year ago. So the goal of this video is for you to have a more informed opinion about the open source versus closed source debate, especially when it comes to AI. For this, we'll talk about what does it mean to be open or closed source? How does open source make money? And the benefits and drawbacks of open source. So first, what does it mean to be open or closed source? Source refers to source code, which is the technical blueprints that commands how a software program functions inside a computer. When developers release their finished product to the public, like Google's Android or Apple iOS, they can decide between sharing the source code or not sharing this code. In open source software, the source code, because it's public available, the programmers have the opportunity to view it, to modify, to change it, versus in the closed source that only the organization that built that software has access to the code. So no one can actually modify. And honestly, for a layperson like me, this debate can almost go unnoticed, as I wouldn't know what to do with a code. For example, in my computer, I use a Windows 11. If you have a Mac, you probably use Mac OS. They're all closed source. But these are not what companies use for their web servers, for example. All the websites, all the digital infrastructure, the companies, they use Linux. 99% of Fortune 500 companies use Linux, which is open source. And I'm not talking about small companies, no, I'm talking about Google, Meta, AWS, many government entities as well, the Department of Defense in the US, NASA, the European Commission, the Brazilian government. Hello, Brazilians. And it's not only in Linux. Anyone can download the source codes behind Facebook user's interface, Google's Android operating system, or even Goldman Sachs' data modeling program, and use it as a building block for a totally new project. I know what you're asking. Why would a company ever release its secret sauce? And before we explore the benefits and drawbacks of releasing open source software, we need to set the record straight here. Open source does not mean free, and closed source does not mean paid. There are many closed source software that are free, such as Instagram and LinkedIn. In contrast, in open source, while yes, the software license, it's not proprietary, and yes, typically there's no charge involvement, there are other ways to monetize it. So how does open source make money? First, free support and services. Many open source projects offer paid technical support, features, and custom development services, such as setting up a mobile development. Second, dual license, which involves releasing the software under both an open source license and a separate commercial license for a fee. And here the open source version might have limited features, while the commercial version could potentially have additional features. Third, partnerships and sponsorship with large companies who may sponsor the project because they use the software a lot. Fourth, donations and crowdfunding by individual users and companies. Fifth, merchandising. Yes, t-shirts, mugs. Six, grants and funding from nonprofits, foundations, and governments. Seven, certifications and training. For example, the Linux Foundation, they offer certifications that are highly regarded in the IT industry. Important to mention that using open source software involves agreeing to specific terms under a license, much like a proprietary software. Many open source licenses are available, but overall they will differ on how the software can be used, how it can be modified, how it can be distributed, how it can be integrated, important points in proprietary products, and all these licenses are enforceable under copyright law. Now let's talk about the benefits and drawbacks of releasing software as open source from the company's perspective, because We, the public, we always want more accessibility, want more transparency. Most of us would love to have access to Photoshop for free, or to see the source code of Instagram, which includes the infamous algorithm. So benefit number one, faster bug fixes, which leads to more stability and reliability. This community involvement, it's huge, so they can quickly resolve issues that a company internal team might overlook. Number two, very cost efficient. The community works essentially for free. So a company can really speed up any improvements and developments using open source. Number three, offer higher security. Open source is often considered more secure because it's open. So anyone can review and audit, which can lead to vulnerabilities being discovered and patched quickly. Number four, fast adoption. It's easily adopted because the users are not locked in any long-term contract like in most proprietary systems. Number five, fast innovation. By allowing this diverse range of contributors, you are actually extending the amount of ideas that maybe wouldn't have been conceived within a single organization. Number six, high reputation and brand loyalty, as these companies are perceived as contributing positively to the tech community, which increase customer loyalty and attract top talent. Many companies made a very effective business out of it. In this chart, you can see the valuations of companies in the open source space, which is increasing since 1999 to 2019. Sun Microsystems, for example, acquired MySQL for $1 billion in 2008. And a bit less than 10 years later, IBM acquired Red Hat for $34 billion. This is the largest software acquisition so far. This chart is part of an Andreessen's presentation about the commercial journey of open source project, which I left the link to the slides in the description. Hopefully the advantage of open source software are now clear. Now let's talk about the potential drawbacks. Number one, yes, money. Monetization challenges. While open source can generate a revenue, these streams may not always compensate for the initial investment. Number two, competition risks. As competitors use the same code, they can create rival products and possibly even target the same customer base. Number three, increase attack surface. With the source code available, potentially malicious actors can scrutinize the code and exploit any weakness and find a way to breach security. Number four, delayed patching. While the community-driven nature of open source can lead to rapid bug detection, the process of fixing these bugs might not be as swift. Number five, lack of control. With multiple contributors, maintaining control over the direction and standards of the project can be challenged if not managed properly. So we learned that many big tech companies use open source software, and some even release their own source. Remember, open source does not mean free, and closed source does not mean paid. When deciding whether to release their software, companies need to weigh the benefits, which you saw in this video, against the drawbacks, which is also in the video. And what about an AI? Models like GPT-4 and Llama cost a fortune to train. So would it make sense to open source them? In our next video, we'll dive deep into the open versus closed debate in AI. Spoiler alert, not all terms might apply. The best way of learning is by asking. Until our next, but why?